Notice that in Glinda's outfit, the one you speak about, the bubble dress, we see a lot of bubbles. We also see butterflies. So we get the idea that she is, gravitational.
Exactly, and that was a big inspiration for her. With that she was about all that is airborne. The butterflies, bubbles, air that moves through space, and somehow being able to articulate that with design was very important. I mean, the bubbles that are printed onto the bubble dress, they kind of swirl around, so it's always present, and you see it in the scenery as well. What Nathan Crowley did, a lot of the relief, the sculpture on the architecture at Shiz, you see lots of spiraling. For the forest, you've got trees that are spiraling as well. So it was something that really happened. Uh, it was what we were drawn to. And we kept drawing. I was literally drawing it, but then that image would show up in Nathan's work as well. So we were kind of spiritually aligned as we were creating this world, because much of the earlier stages we were not in the same room, and then once we got to London, which was about 4 months before we started filming, then I started to see, oh, we have been talking the same language, and that's really what it was about, is trying to figure out, okay, so what rules are going to govern this world of Oz. And some of it is inspired by the 1939 film of The Wizard of Oz, and those icons, and how we see that, how we imagine fantasy, especially as Americans, because it's kind of our big American fairy tale. But then you have the Frank Baum book that was based on, from the turn of the century, and then Gregory Maguire's novel, and all the imagery that's in the text there, and then of course the Wicked Broadway show. So when you're faced with navigating all of that imagery that's already in our collective consciousness, you pick and choose what's important and what's specific to how John wants to tell the story. Part of that was, when you think about Glinda, it was for me, it's the Glinda that Billy Burke played, and that pink dress is what I think of when I hear the name Glinda. That's what I think of, and so I pulled that into the idea of that into how I would re-envision the Glinda for our production of Wicked, with the pink, the same pink, and with the silhouette of that dress. And then also the height of the crown. I mean, all of it was to have it feel comfortably for everybody who comes into the audience to see the film, and they come with a preconceived notion of what this will be, who these characters are. So it's aligning it with that, as well as giving it a new, fresh vision.
Going back to delineating their journey through the costuming, I noticed that Elphaba seems a little more restrained at the beginning, contained,
Mhm.
and as the movie progresses, I don't know what the right term would be. There's a loosening of
Mhm.
her costuming.
Yes.
Also, I noticed that her height. Her boots keep getting higher as the movie progresses. Can you tell us about that progression?
Sure. I mean, the story of Elphaba is a girl and then a young woman who has lived a reserved life, because she even in her childhood, she's been marginalized by the color, because of the color of her skin. So that it informs how her personality has developed. Also, her mother dies when she was very young, so we see that she has been in mourning for a certain period, where when we're introduced to her as a young girl, and then the decision to hold to that color palette, my work in making that decision, it then it tells you that she's somehow stuck. I mean, if she's emotionally stuck and trying to figure out who she is. And so then when she does, by happenstance, she ends up at Shiz, first as the caretaker for Nessa Rose, the adored sister. And then, she gets put into the same space, live space as Galinda, and it's like all of these these moments kind of add up to how she then starts to re-see the world. And that I wanted to reflect that in the clothing. So you start from a girl who is restrictive, and thinking about that, the original Wizard of Oz book was written at the turn of the century, and also that the Wicked Witch of the West from the 1939 film, that silhouette is very much based in a silhouette that's from the turn of the century. So I knew that that was where I wanted to get to by the end of the film. And then to support that, I wanted to choose silhouettes that would help me to get there. So when you see the pinafore that's covered in, it's ivy, black ivy on the little girl's dress. So it's the idea of it is based on a turn of the century dress of a little girl, and then we go to Shiz, and she's in a fairly restrictive dress. I mean, it's a beautiful coat. It's one of my favorite designs.
It's felted.
It, yes, her dress underneath the coat is felted. She has a coat that has kind of leg mutton sleeves that she takes off, and then the dress itself is felted. Much, I mean, I was speaking of the mushrooms and fungus. So you start to see those elements reflected in her clothing, and then she goes into her version of the Shiz uniform. As with everybody else, it's specific to how they represent themselves. So hers is much darker. It's also very constrictive. I mean, it's very, it's a beautifully tailored garment, but it's also it can put people off. It's she's wearing it as armor. And then as we progress, first when when she and Galinda, after the Ozdust ball, or Ozdust ballroom, there's a shift in how she sees herself, and therefore how other people see her. And then there's another shift when she and Fiyero learn their love for each other, or are drawn to each other. And she, her hair changes, and her neckline opens up, and she becomes softer in how she presents. But then also she becomes more agile, and I added pants to that silhouette with the short kilt, which is reflected in the rest of Shiz. But then it makes her more mobile. And then I knew that I wanted to dress her up when she goes to meet the wizard, and that was putting her into that dress, which would set us up for that final look, which is the Wicked Witch of the West, and then the cape and the hat, and she twirls around, and you get it. And then
That
she takes
dress
out
is
the-
an amalgamation of everything we've seen, the materials that we've seen previously, correct?
Right. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So we get the impression that she's consolidated.
Exactly, exactly. And even that, I mean, that dress, it has an undercolor of purple, so that it has an iridescence as well. So that again, I mean, with her whole track, it was important for me and for John to make sure that Elphaba and Galinda were seen balanced. I mean, so that where Galinda, it's very easy to make her look glamorous because of the color pink, and the fit of her costume, and then she's got a peignoir that's very, it's very much a Hollywood kind of glamorous silhouette. That her other clothing, it all has this light feel. It's it's she it speaks of being an uplander. And that's, it's easy because we have this image of what beauty is, what being pretty is, what being nice is. And that's how she draws people in. But for Elphaba, one, first with green skin, but also being in very dark colors. If you look at her clothing, I mean, for me as a designer, her clothing is the most beautiful of the clothing because of all the texture, and how it's cut, and it's just all of those things are much more interesting. But I wanted to make sure that they both resonated as very intentional dressers. I mean, they know what looks good on them. They make very specific choices about what they're going to wear in every day, every moment. So they are cut out of the same cloth and then completely opposite.
Mhm. Am I right to assume that you identify more with Elphaba
Oh yes.
as a designer?
No, I do. I mean, that was one of my, and as a designer, I'm always looking for a hook, an emotional hook into how I see these characters. And it was, as I was imagining what this world was, and I was listening to the music, over and over and over again, I then realized, oh wait, this is me. Um, but then you say, okay, well, so how do I figure this out so this puzzle makes sense within the given world that we're creating?
Right. Yeah. You, uh, John, and the rest of the designers do something subversive that I found terrific. Is that we have preconceived notions about light and darkness, and you know, Alphaba. Almost every pivotal scene takes place during the sunset, and the journey of the film is towards darkness. The last scene that we just saw is sunset and it's
Exactly.
darkness.
Exactly.
And with Glinda, all of her scenes is doing a sunrise.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you visually, also with your custom design, draw us the parallels between light and dark. Can you elaborate
I
on
mean,
that?
that was, you're speaking of Alice Brooks' amazing work as a cinematographer. I mean, she speaks of that and how she was navigating and orchestrating the lighting to tell the story as well. So, we're all in our departments, figuring out how to manifest what John is, hoping for as far as how he wants to tell the story. And then collectively, it adds up to a very rich experience.
Um, Tell us about Ariana Grande's, Glinda's Ozdust ball gown. It's a showstopper. It's like a blooming flower.
Yeah.
Tell us about that design and what it means.
Well, that was one that was because we were filming in London and we had pre-production in London. I happened to be living. I was in Primrose Hill, which is a beautiful neighborhood of London, and very close to Regent's Park. And in Regent's Park, there's a flower garden that's gorgeous, gorgeous. And they, at the time, there were roses that were blooming, a whole bank of them, and and I was, because I was away from home. I was in, I live in Brooklyn, New York, and being in an unfamiliar space was magical for me as well, and being surrounded by the art and the architecture and just everything, it opened up my mind in a way. So when I was, experiencing these flowers, and looking for inspiration, there was a rose that was pink on the edges, and then it ombres into a golden color, a yellow, towards the center. And so I used that. I took photos of it. I didn't pick any of them, but I used photos of them and took them to the fabric painter and dyer to start to work up samples of fabric. And then, I realized it would be perfect, for the Ozdust ballroom, that she would have this kind of blooming rose dress. I mean, it's all about, it's how she is enticing Fiero, and what are those things that she has in her bag of tricks, where she can, come on to Fiero.
And Paul, when you come up with these ideas, and then you have Ariana Grande who is going to wear the dress, does she have any input, any collaboration with you during that process?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't design it and avoid. I mean, especially with costumes, you have to. I have to design with the person that I'm dressing in mind, and I'm thinking about the character definitely. But at a certain point, it's some part of the process. I need to engage the actor to be a part of, to buy into, and to be a part of the design, because they will be the one that is bringing my design to life. We're working collectively to create a character. So I have to get the image, a solid image down on paper, so that both of us can look at it and say, is this right for the character? Is this not right for the character? are there other solutions that might be better for the character? And actually, it's interesting because I just remembered that was not the original design for the Ozdust Ballroom. There was actually another dress that was designed for the Ozdust Ballroom. And then once we were fitting this dress, it was Ariana that decided that this would be more appropriate than the other dress that I had designed. And the one that I had designed actually ended up on the rack. It's one of the dancing dresses that's in her in her dorm room. But it was, it absolutely. I mean, she even said that it was one of her favorite dresses. The Ozdust ballroom dress that we ended up with. Yeah, yeah.
I've only seen the film twice, and I can't wait to see it over and over again so I can catch. There's so much in your design that the second time I started noticing even more. For example, Elphaba's mother is dressed like a poppy.
Yeah,
Can you
that's right.
tell us about?
Again, the inspiration for that was, I mean, the fact that her mother is she has a secret lover, and her lover is pushing a drug that then makes Elphaba green. So just thinking about that abstractly, it made me think of the field of poppies where the friends, Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, the Lion, they all fall asleep. Actually, I think that only the Tin Man doesn't fall asleep. I think that's it. Um, so and that poppies are that's where opium is born from, and then that idea that, well, this aligns her with this need, or the fact that she might be using this drug made me or inspired me to use that poppy color. So if you look at her dress, there's it's a poppy red, and then there's an ombre going from the top of it's a organza skirt. So it's like a poppy turned upside down, and then at her waist there's an actual poppy that's she's using as decoration on her dress. So that was how I arrived at what her design would be. I mean, that's the joy of being able to design a fantasy, but also a fantasy that has icons that you can start to manipulate and make into it for me makes the story that much more exciting, because there's a connection, there's a communal connection to what the image is.
But do you do it so people notice it, or to help you tell the story? I mean,
Both. I mean, I think that you do,
because I
I
mean, it's
design
yeah,
what resonates for me,
yeah.
and I hope that it will resonate for at least 50% of the people that will see it. And that's all that I can count on.
Yeah, yeah,
But if I resonate with that part of the story, then I know that somebody out there is going to get it.
yeah, yeah. Madame Morrible, clouds, meteorological signs. You know,
Yeah. Because she is in control of the weather. So I was, finding imagery that would inform, that power, that magical power. So really leaning into astrological signs and stars and moons, and those things that are magical. And then it was also very important for John that she, when we first meet her, that she is adored. I mean, that she's this, very interesting, exotic teacher, of magic, and that everybody wants to be in her class, and and that she seems to be a creature of good, a person of good. And then we realize what actually is in operation when we get to Emerald City. Yeah.
Nessa Rose,
Nessa Rose.
Nessa Rose, Elphaba's sister, who's in the wheelchair. She has crystal slippers that have tornadoes in them.
Yeah, so that was another element of Mrs. Throp, of Nessa Rose and Elphaba's mother. You see those slippers at the foot of the bed at the very beginning when we're introduced to Elphaba being born. You see them sitting there. These crystal slippers. Now these crystal slippers are actually the equivalent of the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz from 1939. But they're crystal and silver because that was actually what Baum wrote. They were changed to ruby when Technicolor, became popular, and they wanted to really emphasize that color in the shoes. But the jeweled shoes, are then gifted, as you know, they're gifted to Nessa Rose. And she wears them for Ozdust, and for Wicked Part 2. When you come back, then you'll see what happens to the shoes. But it involves a tornado. It does involve a tornado and a house, and but the shoes themselves. I mean, if you look very closely, the heel is constructed as a spiraling tornado that then supports the rest of the shoe, and the shoe kind of opens up as spirals as they envelop the foot. Again, to be intentional about the icons and how it all connects.
And designing her clothing that she's on a wheelchair. Can you tell us about how you approach that?
Sure. I mean, it's really, just making sure that again, because the story overall is, a strong theme about the story is representation and positive representation. And if you think about all the students of Shiz and how they, as young students, they're coming into this new space and figuring out who they are and how they want to represent themselves visually, and making choices about clothing and riffing on what they're seeing around them. And so for Nessa Rose, it was the same, is just trying to figure out how can I make her feel somehow innocent, because I think that's how her father sees her. And that but she's also, it's like from the very beginning when we see her as a little girl, she's like a doll.
Yeah.
She's dressed like a doll that you would see on a bed. And then with the accent of red, which is connected to her mother. And then, as she, and actually, if you look the next time hopefully if the next time you see it, you'll see that she's got striped socks as well. Again, which is foreshadowing what happens in film 2. So, it's just trying to get all those elements together. But, with Marissa, who plays Nessa Rose as an adult, I mean, it was beautiful to be able to design for her. I mean, it's really just making sure that everything is fit in such a way so that she looks as perfect as everyone else.
Um, you have like scenes with 500 extras. How challenging was it for you to dress all of them?
Very challenging. It was. I mean, it was wonderful and exciting, and also, it speaks to the amazing team that I had. Because I had one assistant. My band of assistants. There was one assistant that dealt with largely Elphaba, Glinda, all their tracks, and Madame Morrible, and then there were extra things that she took care of. And there was another assistant that dealt with Fiero, the wizard, and Shiz, like all of Shiz, just making sure that because of how we had to build those things, because of the quantity. And then there was another main assistant, who oversaw all of the background. So it was always, there was always somebody who was full time on a group. And then I made decisions about all of them, but then, they were doing fittings in the workshop space for the background at the same time as we were doing fittings for the principals and
Wow.
and secondary characters. So it had, because of time, it had to all happen at the same time. But then I would get photographs that they would text me, and then I could make direction, from the photograph. Or if I needed to FaceTime, then they would do that as well. So we were all working at the same time intensely. It was full on 16-hour days, usually 6 days a week. But it was also heaven for a designer. Well, for a designer like me, it was really, really kind of golden.
You're a legend of Broadway. This is, by the way, he won the Tony Award for Hamilton. So the those iconic outfits that you see the cast of Hamilton, this man is responsible for. My question is, which one do you prefer, working in the theater or working on a project like Wicked? And what are the differences for you?
I love both. I came up with, I probably was working in theater for about 25 years before I started working in film. So that's really where, I wouldn't say where my heart is, because right now my heart is with Wicked, and it's really having the opportunity to design. From the very beginning, my first Broadway show was Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, and that changed the landscape of theater. And from that point on, having the opportunity, having the opportunity to recreate that kind of experience where, I designed the original Carolina Change, and again, that was one that was, changing how we engage with the genre of musical theater. Mostly, it's been musical theater that I've been a part of on Broadway. In the Heights.
Cat on the Hot Tin Roof.
I did Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, yes. But that was a revival, and it's very, it's wonderful to work with historic work, period work. I love that as well. That really, if it's period, if it's fantasy, if it somehow allows for a design point of view, a strong design point of view, then I'm engaged with it, whether it's theater or it's film. It's just where, it's when I can bring something, a point of view to a story, that's when it excites me. And then I would say that, what informs what I choose to do has, a lot to do with the people involved, the collaborators. So, if you think about Tommy Kail and Lin-Manuel Miranda, George Wolfe, and now John M. Chu, Steven Spielberg, those minds and also their hearts that's a match for me, because I received the trust, I received the respect. They're engaging. They're not crazy. It's and we can get in there and really devote ourselves to creating wonderful stories.
Yeah. Well, Paul, you're an amazing, amazing talent. And come March, we're going to be rooting for you at the Oscars.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.